Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. I'm just setting up my camera now and getting the links out there for people to come and check it out. We'll get started in about 15-20 minutes. So if you're watching this at a later date, feel free to hop forward. In the meanwhile, I'm just going to get links out there and get my palette and everything set up. All right. So I haven't figured out if there's a way to get things posted to different sites easily, but I shall do my best. Here we go. We can open up this. Select all. Copy. Now if I go here, I can copy my link. View in live control room. Here we go. And the chat should be ready. Oh, we got Mateo Clemente. How's it going? I'm just getting all the links and everything shared. Oh, it's my mom. Hey, Mom, how you doing? Hey, Miss Maggie. Just still got about 17 minutes before I'm going to get started. I'm still getting all the links and everything posted. And the video, I think the view might be perfect, actually. Let's see. Okay. So I want to post a link to other websites so people can come by. Feel free to start asking some questions in the chat, and I'll get to those in a moment. Let's create video. Watercolor tutorial. Publish this. Copy the link. And I'm going to go to Facebook. And then we'll go here. No, I don't want that. Post here. Then I just have to post one more thing, and then I'll be ready to check out the chat. Let's create a video. Percy, please stop. Okay. And we'll copy this. We'll do happening now. Live stream painting tutorial. Public. And I'm going to categorize this as live stream. Hey, Hammy. Live notification. And it'll say live stream. Okay, we got that. Publish. I can close this. I can close that. I can copy this last link. Then I can go right here. I could pin this to the top. Okay, so not bad. That was about 5 to 8 minutes to get everything kind of set up. My paper and my palette aren't ready, but kind of all the social media and the links are out there, are set up. So we got Matthew in there. How's it going, Matthew? We got to do our live chat sometime soon. Hopefully this week, me and you and Joe can meet up. My mom is in the chat, and she'll say that this is the only way she gets to see me. However, comma, her birthday's coming up soon. And I asked her what her work schedule would look like, and she said, now the ball for hanging out is in my mom's court, so you're going to have to get that one figured out, Mom. I was thinking that we all get together in Lafayette, me, my mom, my dad, my brother, and hang out and get lunch. Halfway through and nothing has happened. Oh yeah, I'm just setting the chat up early. With YouTube, once I click live, it automatically starts filming. I don't think there's any way for me to click it, schedule it, and get all the links going on social media, because I wanted to share on Facebook and everything. So I'm going to start painting at 5 o'clock, Miss Jane, which is about 10 minutes. So sorry about that. It's just, I think this is my 4th time live on YouTube and still hammering out all the details. If there was some sort of app or something where I could just click it and then it would just do the notifications on Facebook and everything, that would be just so much easier. So if anybody has any ideas or knowledge with going live on YouTube in that regard, let me know. I know Twitch and other things have stream overlays. So in the excitement and anticipation of setting up my palette or this painting, I did a little bit of cleaning of the palette. I'll probably just spend the next 10 minutes doing that. And if anybody has any questions in the comments, just feel free. What I did was taking my paper towel, I had cleaned up some spots, but I also use a razor blade to lift up the big areas of pigment and move them around. Let's see how our lighting's looking. It's looking pretty good. I wanted to paint earlier today or work on a project earlier today, but I had an allergic reaction to something, so that was not fun. I had taken Benadryl and then taken a nap, so hopefully today it's not too sleepy of a stream. thinking that we'll go with a kind of Swan Lake type deal. I was looking for a photograph to paint from so I could post that online so everybody could reference that, but that'll be for a future video down the line. I don't think we'll use many colors, but now's the time to decide the palette. And if anybody has any requests, feel free to let me know. Payne's gray a little bit lower. Let's see what else. Part of me is thinking like an indigo experiment, maybe a 3-color with indigo. Maybe indigo, sepia, or burnt umber. Dip that right into some water. So when you pick up the paint and scoop it up, you can wet it and get it to re-adhere to the palette. I would think I'd have an indigo in here. Brown, raw umber, oxide black. I'm readjusting the location of my Payne's gray and black on my palette. That might give an area to permanently add an indigo. Eventually we'll do a live video with just the moon glow. That'll be fun. There we go. Daniel Smith indigo. Where do I want to put this? This is raw umber, yellow ochre. Let's use this bottom corner for indigo. Amy's just been like crying all day. This Prussian blue right here. A lot of blues to play around with. Maybe we'll do indigo, burnt umber. Do we want a 3rd color? Anybody have any requests in the live chat? Thinking indigo, burnt umber. I'm just putting this on the bottom so it'll adhere. Out the tubes that we're using today. We'll put the white gouache out Think about putting a Swan out in it. Pulled off this little drop of raw umber. I could show you guys in real time how I change stuff on the palette. Just going to hit it with a razor blade. If you do this, be careful. This is a little droplet of vermilion. I'll move that down here. Actually, yellow ochre would be great right up next to the raw sienna. And then, for some reason, I like that raw umber down on the bottom. So put that out. Okay, we don't want raw sienna. By the time I find the raw umber, we should be ready to paint, and it should be 5 o'clock. There we go. Looks like we're using a lot of Da Vinci brand today. Well, 2 paints. Yeah, 3 things from Da Vinci brand and 1 from Cotman. Yeah, Hammy. We're using Da Vinci brand. Yeah, we are. Why did I put that away? Okay. What's up, buddy? Did you know 30% of the voters wanted to see you and Percy, more of you all on video? If you want to hop up on the paper and say hi to everybody, Hammy. Get your fur everywhere. There you go. You just can't have any wet paint. So there's your dose of Hammy. Yep, now you're on the table, bud. You excited? Oh, we don't want cat butt on the screen. All right, let's get your back off. There you go, good boy. All right. So, live stream is going. Links are out there. It is about to be 5 o'clock, and we set up the palette. We'll start rolling with everything. And I'll do my introduction. And there we go. All right, hello everybody, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, we're going to do a fast and loose watercolor tonalist painting. We're going to use Stonehenge Aqua, 140 pound, cold press, 100% cotton. You can see we have a mixture of Hammy's hair, long-haired cat, and hairs from this Hake brush. This is a Ranson Hake brush, the large size. I utilize it simply just to thoroughly coat my paper with water. I like to paint wet and wet, and I use a medium-sized Hake brush for the painting process. That being said, for the water saturation, you don't need a Ranson Hake brush for that. Any old Hake brush would do. But for the painting process, I prefer the Ranson Hake brush due to its stiffness. And the one that I use, I've been using for about 4 years. And it's very well aged. There's a few different Hakes on the market. There's Frankie Clark that sells his models. There's stuff you'll see in Hobby Lobby. You'll see $1, $2 ones off of Blick and Jerry's Artorama. But some of them are kind of way too soft. But we've done a lot of experimenting on the channel about how we can kind of prematurely age Hake brushes to get a little bit of stiffer action out of them. Palette wise, today I am going to use burnt umber. This is a Cotman brand. Some Da Vinci Indigo. This is a mixture of PB7, which is Prussian blue, and PV19. I think that some indigos might be different mixtures of blues. And black, but this one's that too. And we have raw umber Da Vinci as well. And we'll probably use Da Vinci white gouache at the very end. I don't wet the paper on both sides. Originally, when I had started with watercolor, I was doing the Chinese brush painting, where traditionally you'll use a felt surface and you'll put your paper directly on that, the bamboo paper, the rice paper. Then from there, when I moved over to Western watercolors, I got a block of wood for me to attach it to. But some people will wet both sides, and that'll help it stay wet longer. And some people will use it on plexiglass or non-porous surfaces. Down here in Louisiana, my paper doesn't dry that quick, so I really don't have to worry about that. But if you're in parts of the world where things dry really quickly and you're having trouble with the wet and wet stage, those are, I think, some alternatives. I also think the wetting both sides helps with stretching things out. I have binder clips where, as my paper absorbs and the fibers open up, I just press the binder clip down and I press the black of it with the brush. I don't use my fingers because I have a really long beard, and I put beard oil in it. And oils from your hands, or if you use hair product and you use your fingers, you can create areas of resist on the paper. So that's why I just use the back of the brush. Okay. This is the brush that I've been using for about 4 years now, the Ranson Hake brush. Cheap Joe's Art Stuff is where I got it from. You can probably find the brush on Amazon. Where else? Maybe eBay. Some people might have it. ProArt, P-R-O-A-R-T-E, is the maker of the brush. I think Cheap Joe just gets the name stamped on it. So I use just a container of water. I have a mason jar on the side. I put out 2 mason jars this time because potentially using white gouache later on will kind of contaminate my water. All right. So I moved some stuff around on my palette and the color locations. And here's our raw umber. I'll use this to map out the scene. I've never used this triad before. I have done a 2-colored triad with indigo and sepia, but that'll be, maybe we'll go back to that another day. Now with the wet and wet process, and I'll kind of always say this, that I base it a lot off of the modern tonalist oil painters, Dennis Sheehan and Stuart Davies, where they thin their pigment out and will paint on a smooth surface and wipe back and forth. And I'll do the same thing, but with watercolor. Other wet and wet painters, such as Stephen Cronin, will kind of put an initial wet and wet and get an idea for everything and then dry off from there. But I like to spend a lot more time in this stage. And it's kind of just my personal preference to it. I'm also painting flat. Others will have theirs on an angle, and you'll get a swoosh coming in from the side and down, which is a very interesting effect and a fantastic effect, but one that I'm just not going for. So those are all some alternatives to how you can start these off. And I always talk about other watercolorists during these videos and other artists. Mind of Watercolor will do a heavily saturated painting. I believe he calls them his spontaneous watercolors, where he'll feed his pigment in, lift up the surface, move it around, and then from there dry everything off and then create a scene from that. So there's a lot of fun ways you can start with wet and wet, and it just really creates a great unity to paint on top of. There's a video on YouTube that I had watched a few years ago by the American Watercolor Society. I think that's who it was. And they had a gentleman demonstrating a misty fog, and he had taken cobalt blue and mixed it with black and fed in colors like this and let it move around and then dried, and that was his fog base. So anyway, so with this wet and wet approach, you can go back and forth between lifting water out. You can use this to determine or kind of set up a spot that you want your brightest white to be. Especially if you plan on using staining pigments. If you lift out and you don't let any pigment move to that area, it'll give you a good point of reference. Let's grab a little bit of burnt umber. The last live video from last weekend, we utilized burnt umber, raw umber, and raw sienna. The indigo will give an interesting effect. In fact, having never played with this triad, let's grab some now, just so we can start getting an idea. When experimenting and playing with triads, it's kind of good to throw the color in, get an idea of what you're going to get out of it, and then from there determine which one you want to use to kind of push things back and which one you want to use to pull things forward. You also want to see how things are going to dry, if they're going to lighten up, if things will stay dark tonally, and how they'll lift. All right. So you can see how I pulled up the water out of those areas, and none of my puddles want to flow into that spot. You can always take the Hake and re-wet that spot. I want a dark forest, something that the that the Swan is going to really pop out against. Okay, I'm just stretching my paper out. And if anybody has any questions, anything that they would like to see in the chat, let me know. And we'll really build up the feel in this imaginary scene. Okay, so I use a silver black velvet for my riggers. The riggers are your fine liner brushes. They are just great. You know, between the Hake and one of these brushes, that's really all you need to kind of play around. I had picked up silver black velvet due to recommendations by Rick S. He's another YouTube painter. He uses, I believe, a lot of the silver black velvet. And when I first started, I essentially just got his recommendation list brush wise. This one is probably, I don't know if it's between $7 or $14. They seem a little pricey. It really depends on where you want to go cost wise. Me and Joe and Matthew Clemens plan on having a live discussion sometime soon about cheap and easy ways to get into watercolor painting. So I'm sure brushes like this will be discussed. Blick, Hobby Lobby, and Jerry's Artorama all have affordable alternatives to a rigger like this. And Jerry's Artorama has a lot of the buy it, try it's, where they're $1 or $2. And I think it's the Mimic, M-I-C-I-K or M-I-K-I-K that they have. You'll have to forgive me. I'm drinking a soda while doing this. Just trying to get a little bit of sugar and caffeine going. Had to take a Benadryl earlier, so took some Benadryl and then took a nap. I had something that gave me an allergic reaction, kind of the cheek swelling and kind of like the tongue a little bit. All right. So I was blabbing about the brush. I'll talk about what I'm doing here. In the wet and wet stage, you can take the rigger and put in a whole bunch of just distant, tall trees. They're going to diffuse and they're going to soften up, and it's going to be really nice. You may not see any of them. Maybe you'll see one or two at the end. It depends. But it really just helps develop the entire feel of the scene. For me, I prefer just working back to front. See, I don't know. I had sushi yesterday, so it might have been the raw fish carrying. I mean, it wouldn't have. Allergy wise, sometimes with sushi, I have a little bit of allergic reaction. But I had a tea, a Lu Bao, that they store in baskets, and maybe I don't know, maybe there was like a mold, maybe there was a fungus or something that had grown on it, or the basket itself, maybe like a hay allergy took place. Anyhow, so now I'm building up these trees, going a little bit darker, almost pure raw umber. And your tonal variation, the lighter ones that we put in wet and wet, and these darker marks wet and wet, will build up a sense of depth. That's the main goal. I've watched Stephen Cronin do this quite a bit, where he would put this in, use the blow dryer to dry off, and then put his next stage of trees in. Really great approach, and was very instrumental in my beginning years of watercolor. I'm not sure if he taught himself that technique or if he picked it up from Ron Ranson. He's one of the biggest proponents of Ron Ranson out on YouTube. And it's a fun way to paint without getting stressed out, because you could just put these marks in, put some branches in, and let it develop. And honestly, if you make any mistakes in this stage, there's really nothing you have to worry about. It'll all just come out well in the end. You do want to make sure that you're working the whole thing throughout, especially wet and wet. So I'm going to grab some burnt umber and my indigo. I'm looking for what's going to make my dark in this triad. Usually I'll go with burnt umber and then the raw umber for my dark if I was doing the 2-color palette. We'll see how this is going to work for us. You can always move things around. If we want to bring the reflections down, you just start squiggling stuff. So hopefully you can kind of see the composition starting to take place, where we're going to have the depth of forest. We're going to have our inner edge along that water, where we'll most likely put a swan. And then from there we'll have our foreground. An alternative to the number 1 rigger is a larger one, a number 4. And we'll mix that up. Does anybody have any questions in the live chat? So the number 4 will hold more pigment, and it'll let us put more down at once rather than going back and forth. So if you're ever feeling a little antsy and you want to put some bigger trees down and get that out the way, you can go with that. Try not to pass directly over any previous trees. This is, once again, to create a sense of depth. Sometimes you can't help it. And as you come closer in the picture plane, watch out for repeated shapes being on the same level. So I have that bow. I believe that's a bow. If Matthew's still in the chat, he'll be able to let us know. But if I want to repeat that, bring it up higher. Because at this point, you'll start seeing repetitive patterns. You want to watch out for that. Change up your rhythm. If you look here, we have this distance. If I mimic that distance, and then I mimic that distance again, you start having a unnatural rhythm taking place. So break up your rhythms and break up the variation. Rigger is going to be the same as your script or your liner brush. What art store are you shopping at? And we could probably get some ideas of what you might find there. So I'm looking to break up my pattern. See here, I did it at the same height. I want to break that up. So maybe have something come up and switch that. I traditionally seem to put the same type of tree in. You can see that people like Bob Ross, Joe Menza, they'll put in trees that are more pine tree-ish. Down here in Louisiana, we have our oak, we have our cypress, and there's trees that everybody refers to as chicken trees, which they call a trash tree. Like if I'm going to help a friend like clear a path on his property, or they have like animals or areas that they need to build something for them, they'll call them chicken trees, and I don't know what that is. It's just kind of just tall trees. Just putting some pigment down with the side. I'm staying in the wet and wet phase for quite some time. One of the things I found is I really don't want to mute the camera and use the blow dryer. Plus, if you stay in this stage for a long time, as it dries naturally as you're painting, you won't have that big of a tonal shift. Yeah, the number 1 and the number 4, that's pretty much exactly the same thing that I have. Like, let's see. There's just a whole bunch of different brushes. We have 2 art stores in Lafayette, which is the city north of me, and it's Michael's and Hobby Lobby. They built them right next to each other, so they usually have a few different brushes for different mediums, whether it's like oil, acrylic, or watercolor. But if you look for something that'll handle watercolor, and if you look for a liner, a rigger, or a script, that would be fine. You could even use the Hake brush itself to put in trees. Some people will put in really masterful birch trees in that fashion. You can use the Hake to start putting some foliage in. And once again, being in such a wet and wet stage, this will all diffuse. You can see spots where I wiped with the paper towel where it's not going to soften because the area is dry. And once again, vary your rhythm and your pattern and change the densities. And I use the Hake, but you can just as easily find another large brush that would work for you. A big mop brush, a big flat, whatever you want to use to apply your paint. Grab some raw umber. Anybody have any other brush questions? In the Chinese brush painting, they have a thin brush that they call the whisker brush. I have all these other brushes that are used for oil paints. I had bought this guy once, and I have no idea how to use it. I don't know if you would hold a whole bunch of pigment and water to get a very thin line, but I really haven't gotten much use out of it. You start acquiring a whole bunch of different brushes, even with the recommendation of start with a minimal palette, start with minimal tools. It's inevitable that you're going to want to, yeah, Hammy, it's inevitable that you're going to get more stuff. Thank you, Miss Maggie. It's really just a matter of practice, I think. And probably being your own critic. I think it's easy for us to look at another artist and say, you know, that it looks really good, and that we have difficulty ourselves, because we often see what issues we have you know, within ourselves. But if somebody was like to say, "Oh, I see a face in this painting," or "I see a cat in it," once that happens, it it ruins it for us, for everybody. But you know, it's just playing around and having fun and exploring. Like here, very rarely do I take my paper towel and lift that much in this stage, but right now I'm just kind of exploring and seeing what happens. We could even pull out a lot here and explore with light coming through. Something I rarely ever do, but we can explore with that. Ian Campbell, who is a Facebook friend, and he posts on the Ron Ranson Disciples Facebook page. He recently did a painting where he, I think, went in with white gouache into an area like this and created a glow through the trees. And it was just such a huge risk, but so much reward that paid off with it. And experimenting in this fashion, I mean, it might come out terrible, but there's the only way to learn and to figure it out is to try. I'm just trying to bring a little light coming through here. This light is just glaring, so I'm moving that. Yeah, I agree completely. Paper type is very important. I started with art store paper, and that's usually that alpha cellulose. I think 100% paper pulp is what they'll call it, and it doesn't handle what we do with watercolor. That's probably where you really want to put your money, is into good paper. But JW, what type of paper do you prefer? I'm curious what you all have found and what you all are using. So I talk about the Stonehenge Aqua a lot, but that's one that I found works for me price wise. Works for me paint wise. It's 100% cotton, but that's not the end all be all. You know, you'll have your artists that recommend the paper, but I'm curious that what you guys found work for you. We're just going in with the Hake. Let's darken this side. Since we're painting this glow from our imagination, we're gonna have to just kind of pretend some and see what would happen. some strong indigo in the foreground. I feel like this fog is coming out nice. Yeah, so arches, and I think it's pronounced, I can't pronounce it correctly. It's like arches. That's like a really unique watercolor paper. I used to use it a lot in the beginning. Um, it's, I think, the only paper that they use animal gelatin for the sizing. I'm not sure if any other brand uses that anymore. I think that they're also currently owned by Canson. So I'd used a lot of the arches in Canson in the beginning. Saunders, I don't think I've ever tried that. How do you like that? Is that 100% cotton? It's the arches and the Canson is. Actually, Canson has a lot of different watercolor paper models. They have Moulin du Roi, which is like Mill of the King, I think it translates to. I didn't like it because it was 100% cotton. It was nice in that regard, but the backside had a weird texture to it. And that was about $4 a sheet. So price-wise, it was on point. It was good, but the back of the texture on the back just freaked me out a little bit. I'm taking my card now and scraping. My paper is quite wet in some areas, so I'm getting the dark backfills, but I think that that's okay with this one because we want those dark accents. We're doing that interior forest scene. We have the light that we're allowing to come through, creating this glow. And yeah, just the dark backfills will work for it. So with a limited palette, that scrape, creating that dark, helps. I'm using the flat edge on a little wider angle to plot some whites. And exploring. Because the thing is, once we put our swan in, we're going to want the swan over a dark area to really kind of pop. So I'll probably bring in some darks. You can even pull up pigment from your palette and put it out like that. Let's see. Zoltan Szabo used a palette knife in his watercolor paintings and writes about it extensively in his books. And we're using the side of the card in the same fashion. I think I mentioned how the manufacturing oils on the knife you have to be careful with, so he would pre-treat his palette knife by sticking it in lemon juice or in a lemon. Getting a lot of greens now with this. Well, we're starting to see some greens out of the indigo. That's cool. So Lois uses that one a lot. There's another watercolor painter, and I met her on the Ron Ranson Facebook page. We had started watercolor painting around the same time. I think they also use a lot of Bockingford in England. I think that's what she was using a lot of at the time as well. But I think Bockingford is alpha cellulose. I don't think it's cotton. But I guess she might have switched over to Saunders. Yeah, Hammy. People switching over to Saunders. He's been really vocal today. I know. But yeah, I'll have to catch up with Lois and see what she's been using. Oh, Hammy. This is the Wet and Wet painters. The paper is just so important. But people like David Usher were using the Fabriano Studio, which was only a percent cotton, right? Okay. I didn't know that. So Bockingford and Saunders are the same mill? The Saunders 200, is that like a model or is that the weight, the 200? And Milford? I know Bockingford's sold in America. I'll have to check out those other ones. I'm going to weave over and under this this light and this fog coming through. Get it dark. And I'll put some more foliage in. I know Joe has been using, I don't know if it's the Michaels or the Hobby Lobby brand, but I don't think Michaels or Hobby Lobby are making their own paper. They're probably getting some sort of mill to do that as well. So I'm curious who's making it for them. I like to frame my painting with dark on the sides. It's just kind of a approach that I use personally. You'll wind up finding kind of tricks and tips and things that you do personally. I'm trying to make it not too much of a block of tone. I'm just getting a little variation in there. We haven't done a dry off, and you can see that we're super saturated still. Let's see. Yeah, some in the Ron Ranson you use Blick Studio. I haven't tried that. I wonder who makes all Blick stuff. There's so many questions about how, who's making what and where it's all coming from. I'm going to put out some fresh indigo. I think we're speculating that Da Vinci brand makes the American Journey. All right, I'm building up the pigment on the brush. How do you think Fabriano makes it? Yeah, Fabriano has a lot. Like they have their studio, they have their 100%. Do they do the Gemini paper? There's somebody in that realm that does a paper called Gemini or something where it has the texture that's uneven. And it's supposed to mimic uneven textures that I guess the old masters would find. I'm just building up my darks and just kind of hanging out. So, and looking at the chat. I don't know if I had mentioned that you guys are always welcome to follow along. And if there's ever a specific photo that we want to paint from in a specific palette, we can all paint together and y'all can hang out and watch and ask questions real time. I think that would be really fun. Just trying to imagine this light coming through. And personally, I think that it would come in a larger ray as it passes and spreads out. That larger ray would come from a bright area and it would diffuse as it passes through. So we could look for a tonal gradation potentially. Maybe we'll change this name of this one once it goes into the archives. It's like Path of Light. All right, I'm throwing in this indigo as a dark. I had Strathmore 500 watercolor paper. I think cold press. I wasn't a big fan of that. And they had some pre-cut ones that were exactly 8 by 10. And it was just like, come on, give me a little bit of extra room. I did find a sheet of Winsor & Newton watercolor paper when I was going through my papers yesterday. So I need to place another order soon. I've also been playing with the block printing. So I'm also looking to see what papers I have that I can use for that. I'm going to push with the rounded edge to get the whiter areas. This is going to push pigment out. We've talked about Stephen Cronin being the master of the rock scraping. Him and David Usher. A lot of painters will use just the back of their fingernail, which is perfectly fine. That's a nice rounded edge usually. It's just the back of the fingernail right here. I always forget that you can use that. I don't know if I had mentioned, but I keep on feeling like I was going to mention it, but I keep on forgetting. Like I said, it might be the Benadryl. And I'll have to drink that tea again, maybe next Friday, and see if that's what caused the allergic reaction. I'm going to be really bummed if that's what it is. But anyway, you know, you're always welcome to follow along with any of these videos. And you're always welcome to sign your name to anything that you do whenever you follow along with any of my videos. Yeah, Hammy, they're welcome to sign their own name. And you have my express permission to do that and to sell anything that you do when you follow one of these paintings, one of these videos. So I want you guys to be successful and have fun. Art supplies, as we talk about paper, are quite expensive, so I want you all to be able to purchase these things and to have fun and to not feel confined or restricted to what you can use. Right, Hammy? I think it might be good to do a dry off now and to see where we're at. So I'm gonna take the audio and mute it so that you don't have to hear the blow dryer. All right, so we just used the blow dryer. Thank you, Miss Phyllis. I appreciate that. Um, with this, just a few things to point out before we go into the next stage. When drying off, you can let it naturally dry off. If you use a blow dryer, if it's super wet, it has the potential to push pigment around and not get the effects that you want or change up the effects. If you don't get an even drying, you might get cauliflowers along the edge, so watch out for that. Um, Learn your pigments and experiment with them to see how things lighten up or soften or don't whenever you paint, because some paints will have a tonal shift and things will look lighter and softer. Some things will dry essentially the same. I think gouache is very prone to drying the same, while watercolor is not. It'll lighten up. We talked about the backfills, and you could see how that creates pretty much the darkest element at this point, besides straight from the tube on a dry area. That's a great way to get those darks. But if I was to do that right here, it wouldn't match up. So you want to be careful with your the tonal scraping. These were the rounded edges where we pushed it back, and a decent amount of this was just fingernail scraping. So now let's move on to the next part. With the next part, I'm putting out some paint. We talked about paper, the mist effect. We did not really talk about the mist. What we did was kind of wipe and then put a little bit of clearer images on either side to create that. You can create a mist effect by going wet and wet and tilting the paper around and drying it off there. Spray bottles will create a mist. I think that's a question for Joe Menza. I mentioned recently Ian Campbell posted a picture where he had painted gouache over a spot to create that light glare and mist. And there's another, so I'm not sure who it is, but Matthew and Joe always talk about a gentleman that has a container with white gouache mixed into the water, and they'll pass over that for a mist effect or to push things back. So that's a few different. There's a lot of different ideas for mists. I'm not going to bother wetting my Hake brush To give you an idea, here's my water, and I haven't washed the Hake or anything. It just looks dirty from 10 years of use, even though I rinse it out every time. And if you do put water on the brush, I'll do it so you guys can see. Just take the edge and dip it in a little bit. I literally just put these hairs right there into the water, and that's enough to get things reconstituted on the palette, and you can see that. So water control, and if you find that you put too much water on there, you can take your paper towel and squeeze water out. But now I'm looking to build up my tonal values. I'm looking to build up my darks, creating my texture, and looking to get more depth into the scene. Do you guys hear Hammy just like crying in the background of this whole video? It's probably been like 3 months now that I switched him over to that new food. And he is just fighting that new food all the way. I even bought a different bag of the new food, and one of them I think has like the chicken chunks, the other one has the salmon chunks in it, just to kind of get a little bit of variety to see if that was it. And he's just fighting them so much. Yeah, buddy. Yep, we're talking about how you're fighting me tooth and nail when it comes to eating. Anybody a cat person in the chat? Well, not like a person that's cats, but like, are you into like do you guys have cats, or are you all dog people? Either one is fine. When I was being a school teacher and when I was coaching a lot, I always wanted a dog, but being out the house for so many hours, I wouldn't be able to do that to a dog. And I don't have a fenced-in yard where I rent. My parents have a dog, Rusty. Oh, you got 2 dogs? What type of dogs you got? My parents have okay, so I mentioned earlier that like I had an allergic reaction to something. And my parents, and my mom might remember this because she's in the chat. Do you remember when I watched Homeward Bound, the movie, and I cried so much saying that I wanted a dog afterwards, Mom? Fast forward to me going to college, them moving down to Louisiana because I was up in New York. They moved down here. I moved down to become a teacher. And then the moment I move out the house, my parents get a dog. The moment I move out the house. They might tell the story differently. They might say that my brother and my dad brought him home for Mother's Day or something like that. But I know that the real story was once Andrew moved out, they got a dog. A plot hound? I've never heard of a plot hound. The Chihuahua Pit Mix. Wow. My grandparents had a lot of Chihuahuas, I think. My Louisiana grandparents. Up in New York, they had, I guess, a mutt, essentially. My grandparents named Buddy. That was a That was a cool dog. So I'm just slowly building up the texture, chatting about dogs, uh, trying to make my mom feel guilty about the dogless childhood. Though my allergies are so bad, I would have been like dying every day as a kid. I'm really liking this color combination. Yeah, so for Mother's Day, my dad and brother had picked up a dog, Rusty, and I think we have photos of her holding Rusty that day, and she had saw Rusty being held by them and thought it was a stuffed animal, and she said to them, "That better be a stuffed animal," and it was not. And now my mom is totally a dog person. Her and Rusty, well, I think he's eating healthier now, but her and my Rusty used to have a morning ritual where she would go and eat her breakfast on the couch, and Rusty would hop up onto her lap, the big old yellow lab, and he would share her breakfast with her. Which Percy the cat has been the same way with me, where if I'm eating a burger or something with bread, Percy just wants bread. And she stole some lettuce out of my salad the other day. My cat stole lettuce out of my salad. I'm taking the rigger now, and I'm trying to build up the density of this forest area. And I'm just skipping above and below the fog. And you'll see if there's something you don't like, or if you want to wipe it back some or soften it, you can do it just like that. We're using, once again, just raw umber, burnt umber, and indigo. But at this point, you can just use any one of them or all three as just a dark mix. That's where I start going whenever I am painting, especially on a minimal palette. I'll kind of get a feel for which one will be my dark and which one will be for pushing backwards, which one for pushing forward. Do a little bit of that side brushing. And let's see. This will let me know how long we've been filming for. It says hour and 19 minutes. So I started 20 minutes early just to kind of set up the palette. And then there was the introduction, the wetting of the paper. So this is a sub 1 hour painting, to give you an idea. And of course, things are kind of stretched out because we're kind of talking and hanging out. But this is to give you an idea of what's capable with fast and loose painting, and how you can create these imaginary scenes and really just have fun while doing them. I'm glad you're enjoying it. And it's 6 o'clock here in the Central Time. I hope everything's been going well in Australia. I'm curious, in America, if you were to buy a sheet of watercolor paper, the 22 by 30, so the big sheet, and this is a quarter of that, you're going to pay in America online um, between 14 US dollars and, sorry, 4 US dollars and probably 12 US dollars, depending on the brand and the weight and the quality. I'm curious how much in Australia, what y'all are paying. There's a few people that I've talked to from there, and I know they had to get things shipped, brushes, etc., from family members or people that they knew in other countries. So I'm curious what's available in Australia. Let's get a little dark right here because we want to put the Swan over it. I'm going to do a quick dry off. I'm going to pause. Mute. All right, so there's a few things I want to show you all now. The first is that having a cheap Kindle or electronic device nearby whenever you're painting is always great for simply Googling and pulling up images of objects. For example, if I want swans, just to get a generic idea of the shape, just hopping right into it and just get that general long neck, remind me some of the shapes that we might see. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, with white and watercolor paper painting, since we're doing a swan, we have a lot of different options. I believe I have some videos on the YouTube. At this point, there's over 700 on the channel, and there has to be one where I discuss different whites. But one of my easy go-to is just grabbing the white gouache. Bleed proof white is fantastic. The jelly roll pen. There's even pens that are made up by Uniball. The metallic set, I think it's gold, silver, and white. I think that's at Walmart. Anywho, that is just some ideas for the whites. I'm going to grab the number 4 rigger. I have a separate container for my white, for my mixture, and I have a separate palette for that. This is going to contaminate my mixtures on this palette with that chalkiness, so that's why I have a separate one. Now, the Swan, honestly, this brush might be a little bit too wide for it. Let's move to the number 1. Get that nice and clean. And pull up this. Now this is the Da Vinci, the white gouache from them. And there's a video by Mind of Watercolor that goes through a lot of different gouaches and experiments with their opacity and their opacity, coverage, mixturability, etc. So Mind of Watercolor has a video on all that. I went with Da Vinci because I had other pigments by them. I liked the price that I saw, and yeah, it just worked out. That was the reason I went with that. That being said, this is probably the least opaque out of a lot of them. Get the little tail feather pop up. Might be coming out a little too far. Maybe we'll increase the body. But you're just getting the idea of that fella out. I'm going to grab a little bit of black just to boop in the eye. So I guess we're doing more than a 3-colored palette essentially. A little bit of black right there. And I have a little bit of vermilion on the palette. It's not pure vermilion, it's a xeiyu. I think vermilions might be poisonous. You can use light red oxide, anything like that. And we'll put that in for the beak. And you can experiment with the jelly roll pens. You can experiment with micron pens. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can use. It's been a long time since I put a Swan in painting. I think that's reasonable looking. And if we need to come back to layer whenever it dries, we can do that. There is something else I wanted to show y'all. Is we're going to grab the number 4. I'm going to wet it with somewhat clean water. I'm going to splatter the painting. So I'm splattering clean water out. I haven't done this in a while, but I think you'll find it cool. Some pigments it works really great with, others not so much. And just splattering clean. Give it a moment to kind of loosen the pigment underneath it. I don't know if it'll show up on the camera. Hopefully it'll show up on the end painting. But we can then press down and just get a little extra texture, a little extra feel. Not showing through too much, but it's something to play around with. And it gives kind of that floaty effect of things floating in the air. You can also water down your white gouache. We can splatter some of that. And since we used black for that guy's eye, I'll add a little bit of black. And while I do this, from Australia, so the Australia question is answered. Let's see. Quality products are not cheap. Being on a budget and living in the bush, I buy the best I can afford and dream about the rest. Most of the products are imported. Yeah, I can imagine it must be difficult finding watercolor paper and all that, especially in the bush in Australia. Somebody should start a foundation for watercolor artists in Australia and send you all some quality watercolor paper. I'm using the black to splatter in my darker areas. So I use the white to splatter on the kind of inside, black around the edges to give a little depth and texture. You have to shop online. So, dang, that's a shame. There was a he was an oil painter, and I'm gonna mix a little bit of black in. I'm gonna just mix the dark since I'm using the black now, and put a few trees in. There was an oil painter turned watercolorist that was living in Australia, and I'm gonna have to see if I could find him. He had passed away 2 years ago. It might have been Alan something, and I love seeing his work. I think he used a heavy gouache with his watercolor, and he posted so much on the Rick S. Friends Facebook page, and it was just phenomenal work. And the colors that you all have in Australia, I guess to catch the, is it eucalyptus, and the different trees, it was just so stunning. But yeah, and then one day I realized I hadn't seen a post by him from a while, and I discovered that he was no longer with us. I think he had filmed some tutorials too, or at least he had a DVD that he had filmed, and I don't know whatever became of that. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I was going for a kind of that enchanted forest type feel with the swan in the middle of it. It's just a lot of fun. I accidentally grabbed some Payne's Gray, and let me scoop that out the middle and toss that back on the side. So we can do a last dry off and see if there's anything else that needs to be done. And then if there's anything we want to poke around with, we'll do that. Answer any last minute questions if anybody has anything else. Let's throw some birds in. These birds wish they were swans, but they're birds and they're unique in their own right. Let's pause real quick. All right, so this is where we're at. We can push it further if we wanted to take some darks and really emphasize this framing area. We can keep it as that brown monochrome going across if we'd like. So there's a lot of directions you can go in if you wanted to continue playing around with this. If there's anything you all would like to see or any questions, let me know, and I can continue pushing it further. If not, we can start wrapping this up. I will grab a little bit more white gouache while I give you guys time in the chat to ask any questions, or like I said, if we're want to call it done. Marie's Chinese watercolor paints has a white that's very opaque. So Chinese watercolor white you can use as well. That's a good one. Let's move that right down there. You can sign with the jelly roll if you want your name to pop out. Sometimes people like to hide their name within it. So whatever you prefer. I'm just going to take a number 1. So this is a wide repeatometric. It has carbon, platinum carbon ink. Great drawing ink, but it really gets soaked up into watercolor. So it goes on dark, but then it lightens up if I'm drawing on top. But the name will at least be in there somewhere. It doesn't look like any questions? Oh, thank you for dropping by. I'm really glad you guys hung out and asked questions and watched. So thank you so much for coming by, Miss Phyllis. I hope you enjoyed. And Sundays seem to be the best day. That seems to be the day everybody prefers. I won't be able to do every week, every Sunday, but I can at least do a notification in advance on Facebook, on YouTube, the Ko-fi, the Patreon, all those like different websites. I can post that. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you hanging out too. Hope all's well by you. And hopefully we get to do that live chat soon. Thank you, Miss Sue. I really appreciate it. The atmospheric effects that you can get with watercolor in such a short period of time is so much fun. It's just a lovely medium. And when you think about it, I started the video 20 minutes early before we were going to start painting. And about 8 of those minutes was set just getting things up online. And from there was very little prep work. So between the atmospheric possibilities of watercolor and the minimal prep time, the minimal cleanup, I mean, literally just have to go dump these in the sink and just rinse off my brushes. It's just a great medium to work with. So on that note, thank you all so much. And I will talk to y'all soon. And of course, please like, subscribe, follow, and I have tons of videos down below. And I will be back soon with regular videos, the shorts, the time lapses, live. I love doing this, so I'll talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.